The 2022 college football season has come to an end, and today I'll be giving you guys my final top 25 of the season. This was a season filled with upsets and surprise teams, and it all came to an end with Georgia beating TCU 65-7 for the national championship. Georgia once again comes out on top. They've won their second straight national championship, and from start to finish, this was an incredible college football season. And I'll be kind of recapping it here today and giving you guys my final top 25, seeing what the final top 25 is. So that's it. Let's get into it, starting out with 1 through 7. Georgia, obviously number 1. They beat TCU 65-7, just completely destroyed them, dominated them from start to finish. And as Stetson Bennett said, that was cold, brutal domination what Georgia did in that game against TCU. And they finished a perfect 15-0, the only undefeated team of this college football season. So Georgia is the clear and obvious number 1. But number 2, I've actually got Michigan. The Wolverines, I do have at number 2. I know TCU beat Michigan in the semifinals. Some of you guys might be screaming at me for that. But look at how TCU played in that national championship game. And look how close that Michigan-TCU game was. Michigan was extremely close to winning that game. It was a 45-51 final score. And TCU, I mean, you got to give them credit. That was still an outstanding win for the Horned Frogs there against Michigan. They forced points off of turnovers, which is obviously a key factor. They just couldn't do that in the national championship game. But in the end, Michigan would have absolutely put up a better fight than TCU did. Look at how Ohio State played against Georgia. I mean, Ohio State led that game for the majority of the time. They lost the game 41-42. Just a brutal ending there for Ohio State. The Buckeyes, they put up an outstanding fight against Georgia. Look at how TCU played. Just had nothing. So, I mean, I think Michigan and Ohio State should be above TCU. I mean, there's an argument that, but TCU beat Michigan. I understand that. But once again, you got to consider, I mean, TCU had nothing against Georgia. And that Michigan-TCU game was extremely close. It could have gone Michigan's way, but it obviously didn't. But it definitely could have. And for that reason, I think the Wolverines should be number 2. 13-1 on the season, an outstanding season for them. And if you put Ohio State against TCU, I do think, especially where the Buckeyes played on New Year's Eve, I do think Ohio State would have beaten TCU. But TCU, obviously, they got it done against Michigan. They got the win, but obviously it took several breaks and a couple of crucial turnovers, that's for sure. And that's why TCU is number 4. Alabama's number 5. They beat Kansas State 45-20, a great way to finish out the season for the Crimson Tide. 11-2 is where they finished out. And I'd say they're a clear number 5. Tennessee's number 6. I considered putting the Tennessee in front of Alabama. Obviously, Tennessee did beat Alabama in the regular season. And what was, honestly, I think that may have been the best game of the season there. That Alabama-Tennessee game that we saw back in October. That's easily one of the most memorable games of the season. Honestly, one of the most memorable games I can ever remember watching. I mean, that was just an incredible game. Shootout, start to finish, the ending field goal for Tennessee. Yeah, what a game that was. But I do have Tennessee behind Alabama just because I do think if Alabama and Tennessee played at the end of the season, I probably would still take Alabama, just because Tennessee didn't have Hendon Hooker. But I will say this, Tennessee looked good with Joe Milton, and that's a team that will be back in 2023. Penn State, number 7, they beat Utah in the Rose Bowl 35-21. Finished out the season at 11-2. They were quietly one of the best teams in the country. They didn't make too much noise in the 2022 season, but they got it done and had a great year getting up into the top 7 to finish it out. Moving on to 8 through 14, we got Washington at number 8. This team really came around down the stretch. They beat Texas 27-20. 12-2 is where they finished out on the season, moving up 4 positions from our bowl season rankings. Washington, once again, I mean, that team's going to be back as well. Keep an eye on the Huskies. Michael Penix coming back, who had an outstanding year. I mean, the Huskies really came around down the stretch, and they quickly emerged into one of the top teams in the Pac-12. Florida State's number 9. This is also a team that really came around down the stretch. They beat Oklahoma in the Cheez-It Bowl 35-32. What a game that was. I mean, we saw several just incredible games this bowl season. Washington's game in the Alamo Bowl was outstanding. Florida State's against Oklahoma was too. Florida State finishes that at 10-3. That's also a team to keep an eye on as we head into 2023. They're potentially looking like a national contender. Tulane's number 10. They finished out with a win over USC 46-45. It seemed as if Tulane had no business winning that game, but they rallied to finish out that game and beat USC. And Tulane, what a season for them. They were 2-10 just a year ago. They finish out this season at 12-2. What a turnaround for the Green Wave. and they finish on the top 10. Utah's number 11. This is a team that I've liked all season, despite all the losses that they've taken. I just have always believed in Utah, and unfortunately didn't end as they had hoped. They ended up losing the Rose Bowl once again, this time to Penn State. Finished out at 10-4. Still a great season for Utah. Cam Rising coming back. Utah should remain a contender, but obviously I feel like if there was any season where Utah was going to be a college football playoff team, the 2022 season was going to be the one. So from that aspect, maybe a bit of a disappointment, but it really, in week one, that loss to Florida kind of set things off on the wrong foot. And so going into 2023, I think they got Florida once again, but it's actually a home game this time around. I think this could be Utah's year as well, coming up here in 2023, but obviously this team still has got some work to do as they finish out this season at number 11, especially if they want to make it to the top 4 and make it to the college football playoff. Kansas State, number 12, they lost Alabama 20-45 in the Sugar Bowl. Finished out the season at 10-4. This was a team that did win the Big 12 championship this season. They've got that to their name. Beat TCU for that title, and yeah, great season for Kansas State. This team wasn't expected to be the Big 12 champion this season, but outstanding season for them, and that's still a team to keep an eye on as we head into 2023. Oregon State, number 13, what an end to the season for them. They also really came around down the stretch. Oregon State and Washington were kind of in the same boat there. They were kind of two of the main background teams in the Pac-12 for the majority of the season. November came around. Both teams really turned it up and had a great finish to the season. Oregon State blew out Florida 30-3 to finish out the season. 10-3 is their record. Yeah, Oregon State, really impressive the past couple of seasons, especially this one. Oregon's number 14. They beat North Carolina 28-27. They're just behind Oregon State as they did lose to them, but the Ducks, still a great year for them, even though they may have been a bit more disappointing, say, versus Oregon State. 15-21, LSU comes in at number 15. They just completely destroyed Purdue 63-7. The Boilermakers were without Aiden O'Connell. Their head coach, Jeff Brom, had taken off already, so Purdue was kind of in a bad situation for that game, but LSU took advantage of it, and the Tigers are a team to keep an eye on going into next season as well. There are several teams in the top 15 that I do think are here to stay that have really emerged in the 2022 season. LSU is one of them, and yeah, the Tigers played really just dominant football there and finished out the season at 10-4. USC lost to Tulane 45-46. They were up 45-30 with 5 minutes to go. That's just a game that you just can't lose there. Just a disappointing end to the season for USC. Obviously the loss in the Pac-12 title game that kept them from going to the college football playoff, and then that in the Cotton Bowl to finish out this season. So USC, but I still feel like this team is going to be back as well. You got Caleb Williams coming back. Lincoln Riley's the head coach. This team had quite a turnaround from 2021 to 2022, 11-3 this season. Yeah, USC is still a team to keep an eye on. Things are quickly emerging as 2023 could be an incredible college football season. We don't just have 4 or 5 contenders that are big national contenders. I think we got upwards of 10 as we start to look forward to 2023. Notre Dame's number 17. They beat South Carolina 45-38. Also an incredible bowl game that we saw this season. Notre Dame finishes out at 9-4, and keep an eye on Notre Dame as well. That's a team that's got Sam Hartman coming in from Wake Forest, an experienced quarterback who's been excellent for the Demon Deacons. And yeah, so keep an eye on Notre Dame as well. Once again, there are a lot of teams that could be contenders. Clemson's number 18. I got this team dropping down 7 positions after that loss to Tennessee. Cade Klubnik coming in. They had a huge win over North Carolina, dominated in the ACC championship game. I thought Clemson would have put up a better fight against Tennessee, especially considering the potential that Cade Klubnik seems to bring to this team. And he's the quarterback of the future. And Clemson, I do think next season will be better. But the past 2 seasons have been kind of disappointing in Clemson's terms, especially if you compare that to some of their recent seasons. But still an 11-win season. Definitely improvement off of last year. Mississippi State's number 19. A very difficult last month of the season for Mississippi State, but all things considered, for them to beat Illinois to finish out the season was an incredible win, not only for the football team, but in the memory of Mike Leach. Mississippi State finishes out the season at 9-4, still a team to keep an eye on for the future. Troy's number 20. This team really came around. They beat UTSA 18-12, finished out the season at 12-2. I would say Troy is likely the second best Group of 5 team out of the 2022 season. Pitt's number 21. They beat UCLA in what was an incredible game as well. 37-35 was the final. Finished out the season at 9-4, entering the rankings. Yeah, so Pitt really had a strong finish of the season as well. They weren't really a big contender in the ACC for the majority of the season, but once again, down the stretch in November and the later part of the season, this team really came around and had a solid finish to the season. Moving on to 22 through 25, UCLA comes in at 22, moving down 3 positions. Kind of a disappointing end to the season for them, losing to Pitt there in a game that they were dominant from the start, but still a good season for UCLA, 9-4. Nothing to be upset about if you're a UCLA fan. South Carolina, number 23. If you're talking about crazy finishes to the season, South Carolina, this team looked like they were dead heading into the last couple of weeks of the season. They beat Tennessee 63-38 or something. Then they beat Clemson to finish out the regular season. 2 massive wins. Both teams faced off in the Orange Bowl. And then South Carolina plays Notre Dame, really puts up a fight, almost knocks off the Irish, but they take a loss, and they're an 8-5 team to finish out the season. I would say South Carolina, at the end of the day, is the best 5-loss team in the country. Usually you don't see 5-loss teams ranked even at the end of the season, but this season is an exception. Texas is also in there as a 5-loss team. I do have Texas just behind South Carolina. The thing is about Texas, though, this team, their losses were better than South Carolina. Texas's losses were very close. I think all 5 were within 1 score, if I'm right. That Washington loss was another one of them. 20-27 was the final. So Texas, I do think, was an outstanding team for having 5 losses. And South Carolina, I think if you put South Carolina against Texas at the end of the season, I probably would take South Carolina. But if it was earlier in the season, say in October, I'd take Texas, no doubt. It was just South Carolina really came around down the stretch, and that's a team to also keep an eye on going into next season. Spencer Rattler appears to be coming back, and Texas obviously as a team that's got a really, I think, a bright future. I mean, the Big 12 in general is, I'd say, wide open going into 2023. And the Duke Blue Devils finish out the top 25. The Blue Devils, wow, what a season, 9-4. I mean, your 2 big surprise teams at the halfway point in the season were probably Duke and Kansas. And Kansas kind of fell off down the stretch, but Duke didn't. This team really finished out well. They beat UCF 30-13. And 9-4. I mean, this is a team that's been terrible in years past, and they really improved this season, 9-4, and they surprised a ton of people. I didn't even preview Duke for this season because I thought they'd be so bad. I thought they were going to be the worst team in the ACC, as did most people, but turns out this team was actually one of the top teams in the conference. I mean, they were projected 2-4 wins, and they finished out with 9. I mean, that should not be underestimated. Duke is a team that really played well this season. I think they're just as good, maybe even better than the record shows. Their losses were close this season. First 5 out, Fresno State's 26, Minnesota's 27, Texas Tech blew out Ole Miss. They're number 28, Boise State's 29, and Air Force is 30. Minnesota 27, they blew out Syracuse, or at least they had a good win over Syracuse, and Fresno State really played well to finish out the season. I actually considered ranking them, but I figured Duke, I wanted to rank them instead, but Fresno State, their win over Washington State was impressive to finish out the season. Dropped out Ole Miss. What a terrible end to the season for the Rebels. This team just fell off down the stretch, and they're leaving the season unranked. And UTSA was number 24. You could still rank UTSA, but I think since Troy beat them, I'm going to keep them out. But anyway, that's going to wrap it up for my final edition of Top 25, or my Top 25 rankings for this season. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this Top 25, and I appreciate you guys all watching as always. Stay tuned for our way too early college football rankings. That is coming within the week as we start to look forward to the 2023 season. Appreciate you guys all watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.